When Danielle Rivers walked into Monarch Federal's Westbrook branch, no one gave her a second glance. No employee badge, no entourage, no power suit, just a black woman in a gray blouse and dark jeans. But within minutes, they treated her like a fraud. They denied her service. They doubted her. They humiliated her right there in the open. What didn't they know? The woman they dismissed that day was the CEO of Monarch Federal Bank. Have you ever been judged by your appearance before anyone even knew your name? If you believe respect should come before prejudice, drop a respect first in the comments and hit subscribe now. Because today's story isn't just about humiliation. It's about a lesson and a reckoning that shook an entire institution. Hi everyone, welcome to Black Witness. Let's get started. Danielle Rivers stepped through the glass doors of Monarch Federal's Westbrook branch with nothing but her keys and a worn leather wallet in her hand. No corporate badge, no assistant flanking her. No expensive tailored suit announcing her importance. Just a simple gray blouse, black jeans, and a quiet confidence she didn't bother to wear on her sleeve. The lobby buzzed softly with the background noise of keyboards tapping printers, humming, and low conversations at the teller windows. Fluorescent lights washed the room in sterile brightness. A few customers sat in cushioned chairs by the windows, their faces lit by the blue glow of their phones scrolling away. The minutes, Danielle took her place at the end of the short line. She glanced briefly at the man in a neon landscaping uniform chatting easily with a young teller. Nothing out of the ordinary, exactly what she hoped for. She was here for a reason, one she'd learned to trust more than data reports or polished compliance charts. Sometimes you only learn the truth about a place when no one knows who you are, when they think you're just another customer, without a title, without leverage, without consequence. When the landscaper finished his transaction with a hearty laugh and a wave, it was Danielle's turn. She stepped up to the counter, offering a polite, easy smile. "Good morning. I'd like to make a withdrawal from my personal account, please." The teller, a young woman with nervous eyes and a badge that read, Haley nodded quickly. "Of course. I'll just need your ID and an account number." Danielle slid her driver's license and a printed account statement across the counter. She tucked her hands lightly into her pockets, standing relaxed but observant. Haley was just reaching for the keyboard when a door creaked open behind the glass partitions. Out of his office strode Brian Turner, branch manager, 40-something, pressed shirt, forced smile, and eyes that sharpened instantly when they landed on Danielle. "Hold up," he said, stepping between Haley and Danielle's documents without apology. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't process that withdrawal today." Danielle blinked once, measured. "Is there an issue with my account?" she asked, her voice calm. Brian chuckled, a thin, patronizing sound. "We've had incidents lately. People pretending to be who they're not. Withdrawals, you know how it is?" Danielle kept her face neutral. "My account's in good standing. I can provide additional verification if needed." Brian didn't even glance at the account statement. He leaned against the counter, casually smirk, sharpening. "No offense, but this ID, it doesn't exactly scream executive client." Behind her, someone in line shifted awkwardly. At the counter, Haley's fingers hovered uselessly above the keyboard. Danielle saw it in their faces, the quiet moment when doubt blooms not because of evidence, but because someone plants it. It wasn't the denial itself that told Danielle everything she needed to know. It was the way he said it. "Feels off," as if her presence here in this lobby was already a problem. As if her success had to come with a certain look, a certain walk, a certain script. Danielle's mouth curved into a small, unshakable smile. This was exactly the test she had come for. And the real lesson was about to begin. Danielle Rivers was a name that carried weight in certain circles. Just not the kind that wore name tags behind counters or judged customers by their handbags. At 43, Danielle was the president and CEO of Monarch Federal Bank. She had taken over during a tumultuous period when the institution had been rocked by scandal and public mistrust. In 5 years under her leadership, Monarch hadn't just recovered. It had risen to national prominence for its integrity, innovation, and community trust. Danielle's picture hung in every corporate headquarters. Her speeches were studied in leadership seminars. She was featured in Forbes under top 50 women in finance and interviewed by Bloomberg about ethical banking practices. But today she was just a woman in plain clothes holding her wallet at a teller window, being treated like a fraud. Brian Turner, the branch manager, still hadn't asked a single verifying question. He hadn't looked up her account in the system. He hadn't even glanced at the photo ID in front of him for more than a second. To him, Danielle was already labeled and dismissed. The assumption burned quietly under her skin, but Danielle didn't let it show. That was another lesson life had taught her. Outrage makes noise. Power moves in silence. "Brian, is it?" she asked softly. He nodded curtly, already half turned back toward his office, his clipboard tucked under his arm like a shield. "May I suggest," Danielle said, keeping her voice calm, "that you verify the account information before making a final decision?" Brian crossed his arms, his smirk deepening. "I don't need a computer screen to know when something feels off." There it was again. Feels off, not facts, not protocol feelings. Haley shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, stealing glances between Danielle and her manager. Around the lobby, the other customers tried and failed to pretend they weren't listening. Danielle gave a slow nod as if she had been offered a critical data point in a report. She tucked her ID back into her wallet, placed the printed statement into her bag, and stepped aside to the waiting area. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't stomp her feet, she simply pulled out her phone and pressed a number she had memorized by heart. While the call connected, her mind wandered briefly, not to anger, but to memory. 12 years ago, another branch, another encounter. Freshly promoted to regional director, Danielle had made an impromptu visit to a Monarch branch in Albuquerque. She had worn a sharp navy suit, her best heels, and a new leather briefcase. The branch manager had still asked her with patronizing courtesy if she was lost as if a black woman with purpose didn't belong in their marble lobby. Danielle had laughed it off then. She was younger, more forgiving. Today she wasn't laughing. The call picked up. "Lorna, it's Danielle. Please patch me through to corporate HR and tell Roland Pierce to join the line." Her voice was low measured. She wasn't calling to demand. She was calling to document. She ended the call before Brian even realized what was happening. Back at the counter, Haley had nervously tapped Danielle's information into the terminal. Her eyes widened. Her hand fluttered uncertainly over the mouse. Danielle approached again, patient but unwavering. "Haley," she said gently, "could you tell me whose account that is?" Haley's voice shook slightly. "Danielle Rivers, Executive Account CEO." The words hung in the air like a dropped vase smashing into pieces. Brian emerged from his office, clipboard still clutched like armor. He caught the last part and narrowed his eyes. "You checked the system?" he asked Haley sharply. Haley nodded mutely. "Matches perfectly." Brian's face hardened. His next words sliced through the lobby with a sharp edge. "Oh, so now we're just believing anyone who says there's somebody important, huh?" Danielle stayed silent, studying him. She saw it all in the flicker of his expression, the disbelief, the irritation, the bruised ego. This wasn't about protocol anymore. This was about a man feeling challenged by a woman who didn't fit the picture he had drawn inside his head of who held power, and it scared him. Danielle spoke carefully, the way you do when the room is watching, when every word is a chisel, carving something bigger than just today. "I didn't come here today as your CEO," she said, voice even. "I came here as a customer asking for a simple service in accordance with bank policy." Brian opened his mouth to retort, but Danielle continued, cutting him off with quiet authority. "I gave you my ID. I offered further verification. I met every requirement. You refused service because of what you felt, not because of what you verified." Around the room, customers shifted. One elderly woman leaned forward on her cane, watching intently. Another man, young hoodie zipped up, set down his phone, face unreadable, but locked on to the scene. "That's not protocol." Danielle said, locking eyes with him. "That's prejudice." Silence blanketed the room. For the first time, Brian looked uncertain, his mouth working as he searched for a defense that wouldn't sound pathetic. Danielle didn't gloat. She didn't scold. She simply weighted her presence alone, bigger than his bluster. Because sometimes real power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing so still, so sure that the whole world has no choice but to see you clearly. The branch phone rang. Its shrill buzz cracked through the frozen air, causing Brian to flinch, as if remembering suddenly that the rest of the world existed and that it might just be watching him now. Haley glanced nervously toward the phone, then back at Danielle as if seeking silent permission to answer it. Danielle gave the slightest nod. Haley picked up. "Monarch Federal Speedway, Branch Haley speaking?" Her voice trailed off. She straightened in her chair. "Yes, sir. She's here." "One moment, please." She placed the receiver against her chest and turned toward Brian. "It's for you," she said quietly, a tremble in her voice that wasn't there before. Brian approached the counter like a man walking into a courtroom he hadn't realized he'd been summoned to. He took the phone. "This is Brian Turner." A beat, his face tightened. Yes, yes, she's here. Another pause. His eyes flicked toward Danielle, then quickly away like touching a hot stove. Understood, he muttered, his voice suddenly much smaller. He hung up without speaking further, and for a moment he simply stood there, gripping the edge of the counter like it might anchor him. The clipboard, once so confidently held, slipped from under his arm and clattered onto the floor. He didn't even pick it up. Danielle remained where she was, calm, composed, not gloating, just present. The man who had dismissed her minutes earlier now looked at her like someone seeing a painting they once mocked. Now realizing it was a masterpiece, Brian cleared his throat. Ms. Rivers. His voice cracked slightly. Danielle didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence pressed him to keep going, to stand there exposed under the fluorescent lights. I wonder if we could speak privately in my office. The entire lobby, the tellers, the customers, everyone watched this quiet drama unfold like an unscripted play. No one even pretended to be busy anymore. Danielle's gaze was steady. You had your opportunity to address this professionally, Mr. Turner, she said simply, and you chose otherwise. Brian flushed a mottled red creeping up his neck. From the corner of her eye, Danielle saw a young man, a teller she hadn't interacted with yet, step forward from the line of desks. He looked to be in his early 30s, sleeves neatly rolled, glasses slightly slipping down his nose. His nameplate read Malek Howard. Ms. Rivers, Malek said respectfully, I recognized you when you came in. His voice was low but clear. I wasn't sure if I should step in. I hesitated. He sounded ashamed. Danielle turned slightly toward him, offering a small nod of acknowledgement but no judgment. It's not just about stepping in when you recognize someone important, she said, her voice carrying softly through the branch. It's about stepping in because it's right. Malik lowered his eyes, but his shoulders straightened a little, as if the weight of shame was slowly transforming into resolve. Danielle turned her attention back to Brian. You assumed who I was because of what you saw, not what you verified, she said. You decided I didn't belong, and you didn't even bother to check. Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no defense, not one that could survive the scrutiny of a room now fully aware. The heavy glass doors at the branch entrance swung open again. Two figures entered, both in dark suits, their badges clipped prominently to their belts. Marlene Diaz from HR and Roland Pierce, the regional vice president. The sound of their shoes against the marble floor echoed with finality. They didn't stop at the reception desk. They didn't look around for guidance. They walked straight to Danielle. Ms. Rivers, Roland said, offering a respectful nod. We came as quickly as possible. Danielle gave a simple nod in return. Thank you. Roland turned, his expression sharpening as he faced Brian. Brian Turner, he said, voice calm but carrying steel underneath. Come with us to your office, please. Brian looked around wildly as if seeking allies among his staff, but they were frozen in place, unwilling to catch his eye. Even Haley, still clutching her pen like a lifeline, stared resolutely at her computer screen. Brian swallowed visibly. But I didn't know she was coming. She didn't schedule. Roland didn't blink. That's not the issue. Marlene stepped forward, her tone clipped, informal. We've already reviewed the footage from the live branch feed. We heard the audio, Brian. There's no ambiguity. Brian's mouth worked like a fish gasping on dry land. You disregarded protocol, Marlene continued. You created a hostile environment. You made assumptions based on personal bias, not policy. And, Roland added, his voice a low rumble, you embarrassed this institution in front of customers and staff alike. Brian sagged where he stood. It was over, and he knew it. Marlene motioned toward the back office. Now. Without another word, Brian shuffled away, the weight of the room pressing against his back. The door clicked shut behind them, and a collective breath seemed to release in the lobby. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then slowly, cautiously, the staff began to straighten up, to glance at each other, to return to their stations, but not with the same casualness as before. Something fundamental had shifted, like a building's foundation settling deeper into the earth. After a tremor, Danielle remained for a moment longer, her presence filling the space with a gravity stronger than any corporate title could bestow. Then she spoke, not loudly, but with enough weight that every person in the room instinctively leaned in. I'll be addressing the team in 10 minutes. She said, her voice firm but not angry. We will not sweep this under the rug. We will learn from it. She met the eyes of each employee one by one, not to shame but to invite. I hope you'll stay. Without another word, Danielle walked toward the break room at the far end of the branch. her steps slow, deliberate, and impossibly dignified. Behind her, the lobby buzzed back to life, but with a new raw energy in the air, a mixture of reflection, shame, hope, and something stronger stirring beneath it. A reckoning had begun, and reckoning done right could rebuild an entire world. 10 minutes later, the branch lobby was noticeably quieter. The few remaining customers had either finished their transactions or left after sensing the serious undercurrent lingering in the air. Only the core staff remained now. Haley Malik, Leonard the senior teller, and Dennis, the assistant branch manager, clustered loosely near the reception area, waiting with a taut, uncertain energy. The clock ticked loudly from its perch above the entryway. When Danielle re-entered the room, the group instinctively straightened, as if called to attention, not by force but by the silent pull of respect. She walked to the center of the lobby, not behind the counter, not to an office, and stood where anyone could see her, open and vulnerable. In the plain space, Dennis cleared his throat. Awkwardly, "Miss Rivers, I just want to say, if I may, we didn't know." Danielle held up a hand, not unkindly. "This isn't about me being the CEO." A quiet ripple of confusion crossed a few faces. "This is about what happens when you think no one important is watching." Her voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't cold. It was steady, the way a river carves stone over the years, relentless and true. "I came here today looking like any customer might, no entourage, no announcement, because I needed to see who we really are when we're not on stage." She let the words settle before continuing. "And what I found is that we still have work to do." Nobody shifted. Nobody interrupted. Danielle turned slightly, addressing them as a superior delivering a lecture, but as a leader offering a mirror. "It would be easy," she said, "to blame Brian for everything, to pin the failure on one bad actor and move on." Her gaze swept over them. The discomfort on Leonard's face, the worry in Haley's, the conflicted tension in Malik's. "But systems don't break because of one person. Systems break when good people stay silent because they're unsure, uncomfortable, afraid." She paused, letting that land. "When I was dismissed at this counter, what mattered more than Brian's actions," she said, "was that nobody here stopped to ask, is this right?" Malik swallowed hard, looking like he might speak, but Danielle gave him space. "I don't say that to shame you," she added quickly. "I say it because I need you to understand silence is an action, and it has consequences." Haley's voice, small but clear, broke the quiet. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe it wasn't my place." Danielle nodded gently. "That instinct to hesitate, to doubt yourself, is human. It's also what injustice counts on." She walked slowly toward the teller counter, running her fingers lightly along the polished edge. "In this job," she said, "your duty isn't just to make transactions. It's for people. It's to each other." Leonard, who had been with Monarch for decades, finally spoke, his voice gruff. "I've seen managers act like that before. Figured it wasn't my fight." Danielle met his eyes. "Then today," she said, "is the day we stop thinking that way." She stepped back to the center of the room. "You don't need a title to stand up. You don't need permission. If something feels wrong, say something. If someone is being mistreated, step in." There was a shift in the posture around her, subtle but significant, a kind of collective exhale. A readiness to listen, not out of fear, but from a place deeper and more personal. Dennis finally spoke up, voice tight with regret. "I should have said something when I saw it. I froze, I'm sorry." "And now you know better," Danielle replied softly. "That's all any of us can do, recognize, learn, act differently next time." She allowed a beat of silence before continuing. "Starting tomorrow," she said, "this branch and every branch will receive new training, not just on procedures, on values." She glanced toward the ceiling where the branch's mission statement was framed in glossy corporate lettering. "Integrity, service, respect. Words on a wall mean nothing," Danielle said. "If we don't live them, breathe them, stand by them even when it's hard." A faint breeze from the air conditioning stirred the edges of a stack of flyers on the counter. It made the space feel alive, awake in a way it hadn't before. "Some of you will wonder," Danielle continued, "if speaking up will cost you your job someday. If challenging authority could put you at risk." She smiled, not the tight corporate smile from brochures, but something real, something earned. "Let me be very clear," she said. "If you speak up to protect a customer, a colleague, or a principal, you will never be punished at Monarch Federal. You will be celebrated." Malik's shoulders eased a little. Haley let out a breath she didn't seem to know she'd been holding. Danielle finished with something that didn't come from any handbook, any policy, or any HR meeting. It came from the marrow of who she was. You can either be silent and complicit, she said, or you can be brave and accountable. Only one of those choices builds a place worth working for. She scanned their eyes one more time, not as strangers anymore, but as people she was entrusting with a piece of the future. And starting today, she said quietly, this branch is going to be known for something better than just fast service and pretty posters. It's going to be known for its courage. No applause followed. None was needed. The meeting ended not with a bang, but with a rising current of something stronger than noise understanding. Commitment, a beginning. As Danielle turned to leave the group to their work, Malik called after her, his voice steadier now. Miss Rivers, she turned. I'll do better, he said simply. Danielle smiled. So will I. And for the first time since she entered the branch that morning, she knew she had found what she was looking for, not just the problem, but the first flickers of the solution. The next morning, the world outside the Monarch Federal branch looked exactly the same. Cars zipped past Speedway Boulevard. A mother wrangled two toddlers into a stroller across the sidewalk. The sun rose lazily over Tucson, spilling gold across the stucco storefronts. But inside the branch, the atmosphere had shifted in ways that no casual observer could see, ways that mattered far more than polished marble floors or the digital ticker scrolling interest rates across the lobby wall. Danielle Rivers returned, not in a suit, not in the shield of authority, but in the same navy blouse and gray slacks she had worn the day before. She carried no clipboard, no entourage, only her quiet, undeniable presence. She was met not by confusion, not by skepticism, but by something simpler. Respect. Malik was the first to spot her. He straightened instinctively, but caught himself offering her a genuine nod instead of stiff formality. Haley glanced up from her terminal, caught Danielle's eye, and smiled a real smile. Not the customer service mask. Leonard even tipped an imaginary hat with a wry grin. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't fair. It was recognition. Morning, Ms. Rivers, Malik said, stepping forward. Morning, Malik, Danielle replied. The branch wasn't shut down for her business hummed around them. Customers were helped. Phones rang. Life went on, and yet everything was different. Dennis, the assistant manager, approached, no clipboard, no false cheer. Would you like the conference room, Miss Rivers? We can hold the morning meeting there, he offered. Danielle considered it for a moment, then shook her head. No conference room, right here in the lobby. Dennis blinked but nodded. 5 minutes later, the branch was paused, employees gathering once again. Customers politely asked to wait just a little longer. This time, they weren't gathered by command. They wanted to hear what came next. Danielle faced them. Haley, Malik, Leonard, Dennis, two newer tellers named Jasmine and Miguel, and the security guard, Ramon, 7 faces in total, representing the new future she hoped to build. She didn't speak from notes. She didn't speak from anger. She spoke the truth. You've probably heard the phrase lead by example, she began. Heads nodded. But what they don't always tell you, Danielle continued, is that the real leadership moments aren't the ones you plan. She let the silence settle, every heartbeat tuned to her voice. They're the ones when no one's looking, when it would be easier, safer to say nothing, to pretend you didn't notice, to walk away. Her eyes swept the room, not to intimidate, but to connect. And yesterday, Danielle said, her voice dipping lower, heavier, we failed that moment. No one flinched. No one looked away. But here's the thing, she added, her voice sharpening into something brighter. Failure isn't final, it's an invitation to be better. A slow breath traveled through the room, the relief of being told the truth without condemnation. Leadership, Danielle said, doesn't always look like standing at a podium or giving a rousing speech. Sometimes it looks like being the first person to step out of the line, to raise your hand, to say, this isn't right. Even if your voice shakes, even if you stand alone. She saw Haley's hands twitch at her sides. Malik's shoulders squared slightly. And when you do that, Danielle said, when you refuse to stay silent, you give permission for others to stand too. Danielle moved closer with no podium between them and no wall. You changed not just that moment, she said, but the culture of the entire place. She paused, choosing her next words with care. I'm not asking you to be perfect, she said. I'm asking you to be brave. Malik took a small, almost imperceptible step forward. A breath deeper, steadier moved through the team. And brave doesn't mean unafraid. Danielle said. It means doing the right thing even when you're afraid. She folded her hands in front of her. Some of you froze yesterday. She said, no malice in her tone. Some of you hesitated. Another breath. Today you don't have to freeze. She turned, gesturing to the branch. The glass offices, the teller counters, the vaulted ceilings. This building, this company, this mission, it's not built by corporate videos or shiny slogans. Danielle said, it's built by you. Every moment, every choice. She looked around the room, meeting each set of eyes deliberately. Haley, when you see someone being dismissed, you ask questions. Malik, when a colleague stumbles, you steady them. Dennis, when leadership fails, you show what real leadership looks like. Leonard, when someone new hesitates, you mentor them. The words weren't scolding. They were charging orders, a transfer of ownership. And me, Danielle said quietly, I'll keep showing up, even if it means standing alone sometimes, because leadership isn't about who's watching. It's about who you choose to be when no one is. A heavy electric stillness wrapped around the branch. Then without a word, Malik stepped forward, a simple, powerful step, and said, voice clear, we're ready to do better. Haley followed, nodding. Leonard, Jasmine, Miguel, and even Dennis all added their voices low but steady. Danielle smiled, a small, proud curve of her lips. Good, she said. She handed Dennis a small stack of folders, new training manuals, yes, but more importantly, new expectations. This isn't a punishment, she said. This is a promise to yourselves, to each other, to every customer who walks through these doors. As the meeting closed, Danielle didn't dismiss them. She thanked them. She thanked them for their courage, their willingness to learn, and their choice to stay open when it would have been easier to retreat. And as she moved toward the door to leave back into the ordinary sunlit morning, she didn't need applause. She didn't need a ceremony. She left something far more valuable behind, the seed of real leadership. The kind that grows when titles are forgotten, when appearances don't matter, and when silence is replaced with action. Because in that quiet lobby, in that ordinary branch, in that seemingly small moment, a revolution had begun. One small branch at a time, one brave choice at a time. And Danielle Rivers knew this was how you build a legacy. 2 weeks later, if you had walked into the Monarch Federal branch on Speedway Boulevard, you would have noticed something even if you couldn't quite name it. It wasn't the decor. It wasn't the uniforms. It was the way the air felt. Lighter, more honest. The change hadn't come from a memo or a corporate directive. It had come from something harder, something messier. Reflection, accountability, and choice. Dennis, now the acting branch manager, stood by the front counter, greeting customers personally, a small but deliberate shift. No more watching from behind a glass office. No more acting only when the situation becomes urgent. Malik was there too, helping an elderly gentleman understand an online banking portal without a hint of frustration. Haley, more confident, now didn't hesitate to step out from behind her counter to assist when a customer looked lost. Leonard, he took it on himself to mentor Jasmine and Miguel, creating small, what would you do, moments after hours, not as formal drills, but as conversations. Honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but always human. Danielle hadn't returned with great fanfare. She didn't need to. She simply scheduled branch visits as she always had, some announced, some not, sometimes dressed in a suit, sometimes in plain clothes. Every visit wasn't a test anymore. It was an opportunity. Word had spread, of course, across branches, across departments. Not about the firing. That part, surprisingly, was not the focus. What spread was the story that the CEO herself had shown up unannounced, that she had been dismissed and had responded not with rage but with quiet, undeniable authority. That leadership meant showing up even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. At the Speedway branch, something deeper had taken root, a cultural shift. They started small. A new morning huddle, just 5 minutes where employees shared one example of someone stepping up, someone choosing respect, someone making a customer or a colleague feel seen. Sometimes it was as tiny as Malik holding the door open for a woman struggling with her stroller. Sometimes it was as important as Haley quietly pulling Dennis aside to say, hey, that customer at window 2, I think he's confused, not upset. Maybe we can offer him a coffee while he waits. None of it was flashy. All of it mattered. They learned to notice, not just when something went wrong, but when something went right. Dennis initiated reverse feedback sessions where tellers gave feedback to management, not the other way around. At first, it was awkward. Some employees were hesitant, but slowly voices grew stronger. I didn't feel heard when I mentioned the printer issues last week. I appreciate how you stayed calm when that customer shouted yesterday. Real conversations, real growth, and then came the letter 3 weeks after Danielle's silent visit. A handwritten envelope arrived addressed to her office. It was from a customer. An older woman, Clara Jensen, had visited the Speedway branch on a random Thursday. She wrote about how Malik had noticed she seemed unsure about the deposit forms, how Haley had taken the time to explain the differences between savings options without rushing her, and how Leonard had walked her to the parking lot when he noticed her struggling with her walker. They didn't know who I was, Clara wrote. I'm no one important, just a grandmother trying to manage a little bit of money before my surgery next month, but they treated me like I mattered. Danielle read the letter 3 times before setting it carefully on her desk. This was the real measure, not numbers, not awards. The unseen moments, the ones you couldn't fake. The culture had changed because people had changed, but not because someone forced them to, because someone had shown them what it could look like. That Friday, Danielle visited the Speedway branch again. No announcement, no suit. When she walked in, Haley greeted her with a real smile. Good morning, Miss Rivers. Welcome back, Danielle returned the smile. Good morning, Haley. It's good to be here. She didn't need a meeting this time. No speeches. Instead, she moved quietly among them, shaking hands, listening to stories. Jasmine showed her the community board they had set up, a cork wall with handwritten customer success stories pinned up. Miguel proudly pointed out the new feedback station they'd built, just a small tablet on a stand, asking customers to rate their experience with one question. Did you feel seen today in the break room? Leonard poured her a cup of coffee. Feels different in here, doesn't it? He asked. Danielle nodded. Not different, she said, better. They talked for a few minutes about leadership, about mistakes, about second chances. As she stood to leave, Danielle paused at the branch entrance, looking back at the staff spread out across the lobby, greeting, laughing, helping without performance or pretense. A real team, a real place. She pulled out her phone and typed a simple note to herself. Culture isn't changed by orders. It's changed by examples, by standing when it's easier to sit, by speaking when it's safer to stay silent, and most of all, by remembering that everyone matters whether or not you know their title. Danielle slipped the phone back into her purse, pushed open the glass door, and stepped back into the sunlight. No escort, no press releases, no headlines. Just a woman walking forward into a future she helped shape with quiet, determined power. And inside the branch, life continued. Better because someone had shown them how. 6 months later, the story of that day at Monarch Federal had become something more than just a memory. It had become a kind of legend. New employees heard it during training, not from the official manual, but in whispered retellings over lunch breaks. You know, she once walked in undercover, right? They thought she was just some customer, treated her like she didn't belong, and she didn't yell, she didn't threaten. She just stood there and changed everything. No one told it quite the same way. Sometimes Danielle Rivers fired the manager with a single word. Sometimes she gave a 5-minute speech that made half the staff tear up. Sometimes she said nothing at all, and it was her silence that carried the most weight. The truth didn't need embellishment. What mattered wasn't the exact details. What mattered was what had stayed. Across Monarch Federal's branches, subtle changes took root, almost invisible if you didn't know what to look for. Employees took a little longer with customers who seemed confused. Managers sat in the lobbies occasionally just to observe, not to correct, but to witness. Staff meetings didn't just cover sales targets anymore. They talked about trust, about presence, about what it meant to see someone really see them, even when there was no one important watching. A small plaque had been mounted behind the teller line at the Speedway branch. It didn't have Danielle's name on it. It didn't mention titles or hierarchy. It simply read, "Integrity is who you are when no one is watching." When Danielle saw it during a quiet visit one afternoon, she smiled. Not a big smile, a small, tired, deeply proud one. The kind you give when you realize the seeds you planted have started to bloom without you. She didn't announce herself that day either. She just made a small withdrawal, thanked the teller, a young woman with bright eyes who greeted her warmly, and slipped back into the city crowd. No recognition, no spotlight, no need. Because the real legacy wasn't in plaques or promotions. It was in the way Malik held the door open for a woman with a stroller 2 days later. It was in the way Haley stood a little taller when a customer raised his voice, staying patient but firm. It was in the way Dennis, now the full branch manager, corrected a small mistake by saying, "That's on me, let's fix it," without blame or defensiveness. Quiet ripples, Invisible but unstoppable. Leadership wasn't about titles. It was about the imprint you left behind when the suits came off, when the cameras stopped rolling, when the story no longer needed your name attached to it. And somewhere in 100 small moments across Monarch Federal, Danielle's invisible legacy carried on stronger, with every person who chose to be better, simply because it was the right thing to do. Not because someone was watching, but because they had learned what it looked like, and because they now knew they could. And sometimes that was enough to change everything.
I love this story. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more information. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.